Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Castball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey, by Two Ways, One Passion Food Truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. A handful of stuff we're going to get into today in a world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Of course, you had the Hall of Fame announcement yesterday. A lot of stuff we can get into. I could get into my regular narrative when we talk about the Hall of Fame. And if you've listened to the program before, you know where I will at some point get to. As I take this cup of coffee, throw it to the side. A couple other things. We're going to talk about some basketball today. Zion Williamson's making his NBA debut today. Widely publicized. It's worth a couple minutes. Then you had the disgusting, embarrassing scene the other night involving Kansas and Kansas State, which I'll touch on and probably conclude the show with today. But as always, the show belongs to you, so anything that's on your mind in a world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, you can send a message, you can give a show a call if you want, 732-364-3598. So, Derek Jeter, even though he makes it seem as if he was sweating it out, and I guess it's hard to relate to somebody that's in that situation. A first ballot Hall of Famer without any doubt. Especially now in the days where you got the trackers and you know where the majority of the public votes stand. And Larry Walker was probably sweating it out. Curt Schilling and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens were definitely sweating it out. Obviously, they didn't get in, but Derek Jeter didn't have to do that. And the question that was set out really was whether Derek Jeter was going to get 100% of the vote. And I got to be honest, I'm a little ambivalent when it comes to this. I could see why fans would be upset, especially last year after seeing Mariano Rivera become the first player to get 100% of the baseball writers' vote. But I look at the other side, and even though it is a little bit of a lazy argument, no player before Rivera had ever gotten 100% of the vote. Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, they are no less Hall of Famers than Derek Jeter. In fact, you can make a case that every one of those players was a lot more accomplished than Derek Jeter over the course of his career. You know, I think of Ruth, I think of Ty Cobb, I think of Ted Williams. And then, of course, Christy Mathewson and Cy Young and Walter Johnson, Tom Seaver, Sandy Koufax, Pedro Martinez, Frank Robinson. Then there's Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Rogers Hornsby, Stan Musial. All great, great baseball players. And one thing that they all have in common is none of them saw any close to 100% of the vote. In fact, out of that whole list of players that I just named, only two of them, Cobb and Seaver, received over 98% of the vote. So once again, new society, younger generation is going to keep throwing out there this narrative. Derek Jeter should have gotten 100% of the vote. Who cares what happened in baseball over the last 100 years or 80 years? Since 1936, 83, 84 years. But I look at it, and I think it could be two different ways. You could say, well, was Derek Jeter better than Babe Ruth? Was Derek Jeter better than Ty Cobb? The answer is 100% unequivocally no. And you don't want to turn this into a negative thing, because it's not. This should be a day where Derek Jeter enjoys the announcement that he's going to be amongst the best to ever play in Major League Baseball. The 333, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw that number yesterday. Members of the Baseball Hall of Fame, the less than 20,000 players, the countless managers and executives and people that are associated with baseball, and to be amongst that small amount is a huge, huge honor and accomplishment. And that's what we should be talking about today. We should be talking about Derek Jeter's over 3,400 career hits. Derek Jeter's 5 World Series championships with the New York Yankees. The fact that for 20 years, he played a position that's very hard to play for 20 years. You look at some of the best shortstops of all time, and it was very hard to stay on that position. You know, Alex Rodriguez, who you may consider a better overall player throughout the time of his career, moved off of shortstop to play third base next to Derek Jeter. Cal Ripken, dominant shortstop in his time, spent a lot of time playing third base. Robin Yount moved off the position to center field. So this should be a day to honor Derek Jeter, not just from Yankee fans and Yankee blogs and Yankee networks and New York-centric stations, but nationally, throughout Major League Baseball. Just like other players, you could point out some negative things about Derek Jeter, not as a person. He was a stand-up guy. It seems like he always said the right thing. He was never involved in any sort of scandal. There was never any doubt over whether anything could be said about the way he played the game. Was he the greatest defensive shortstop? No. In an era where they handed gold gloves to people based off of, I don't know, certain politics within the game, yeah, he probably stole a couple gold glove awards, but that's not his fault. He didn't go out there and take it. Major League Baseball gave him these awards when, you know what, they didn't really have a way of calculating defensive stats and metrics. So that's not Derek Jeter's fault. Are we saying that he was Ozzie Smith at shortstop? Was he Omar Vizquel defensively? No. But he was clearly a better player than they were. Ozzie Smith won the World Series in 1982, played in 2 others. Derek Jeter played in 7 World Series, 5 of which the Yankees won. So this should be a day to honor Derek Jeter, to give him all the credit he deserves. He had an outstanding career. There's a lot of people that may say, well, I'm not a Yankees fan, so I'm going to think of anything bad I could say about Derek Jeter. There was no question that yesterday, the 21st of January, was going to be the announcement that Derek Jeter was going to get into baseball's Hall of Fame. And of course, the question was he going to get 100% of the vote? He didn't get 1 vote. One writer decided not to vote for Derek Jeter. And unfortunately, that's going to get a lot more attention than the accomplishments of Derek Jeter in a day that we should celebrate his contributions to baseball and the reasons he is in baseball's Hall of Fame. So I put this together right before the show. The highest percentage of votes received by any player from the Baseball Writers Association of America, which once again, we give the baseball writers too much power. And I know writers have some say in votes in other sports, but man, baseball writers really have the ability to control lives. And they take every advantage of that, by the way. You got Mariano getting 100% of the vote last year. Jeter, the second highest percentage at 99.7% out of anybody in baseball history. Third was Ken Griffey Jr. with 99.3%. And then there was a tie of Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan. Ironically, 2 contemporaries, 2 pitchers that pitched alongside each other with the Mets, but against each other for many seasons throughout their career. And like I said, their careers essentially ran parallel to each other. 98.8%. Then you got Ty Cobb, who in the first election of 1936 received 98.2% of the votes. Now that was higher than Honus Wagner, higher than Babe Ruth, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson, the first 5 players to ever get selected into baseball's Hall of Fame in the first election held in 1936. George Brett equaled that down the road at 98.2%. And then Hank Aaron, who, imagine not voting for Hank Aaron for a Hall of Fame. Babe Ruth was Babe Ruth, just a year or so out of his retirement. Some people may say, hey, he may not have been the best of all time up to this point. Certainly has to be up there. And maybe you wanted to focus a vote on somebody else. There's no doubt that Babe Ruth belonged to baseball's Hall of Fame. And it's hard to understand why somebody wouldn't vote for Babe Ruth. But it's more understandable talking about the infancy of the Baseball Hall of Fame voting process, which had just started. They had their first election. There was going to be many errors and omissions and things that they'd have to correct if this was going to become what it is today. 84 years later, the Baseball Hall of Fame considered, in spite of all its fallacies, which I will not be able to finish the program without talking about, but to be as stable as it is, right or wrong, whether the right players are in or the right players are omitted, it took some time to build up the credibility of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So I can accept Babe Ruth not getting 100% of the vote the first year in 1936. I'd have a harder time accepting him not being selected in that first group. Him, Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner. And I know there's some other players, whether you talk about Rogers Hornsby or Cy Young. Cap Anson had a great career in the 19th century. Tris Speaker. I mean, those players would eventually get in 37, 38, 39. But I would have more of a hard time understanding why Babe Ruth didn't get in first ballot than 100% of the vote. Henry Aaron, I have a hard time explaining, because Henry Aaron was everything that Babe Ruth was. And in spite of having to deal with the racism and the taunts that he had for a series of years, death threats mailed to his house, racial slurs being called out to him while he's out on the field, even in his home ballpark of Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta, by racists that didn't want to see a black man become the all-time home run king. And you would figure by the time he's retired, and by the time there's retrospect to look back at the great career that he had, I would have thought this would be the perfect player or the perfect opportunity for the baseball writers to get together and get as close to 100% as possible. And they did not do that. Henry Aaron, obviously 97.8% of the vote is great. He's a no doubt Hall of Famer. He didn't have to worry about not getting in on the first season. But if there's a player in baseball history that I say would have been most deserving to get 100% of the vote, it would have been Hank Aaron. And that's no disrespect to Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter has a chance to benefit in a day and age where the voters are younger. A lot of the old school writers that, let's say, may have voted or not voted for Joe DiMaggio his first year, may have not voted for Willie Mays or Hank Aaron the first year that they were available or eligible for baseball's Hall of Fame. They're either retired or inactive or have died off. So we understand there's going to be a little bit of a change to the process. And we could be in a spot where we could talk about players that may have more of a chance to get 100% of the vote. But I believe that this is something that's blown out of proportion a little bit too much. I think there is a lot of emphasis from Yankees fans claiming that this should have been such a foregone conclusion. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's unfortunate, and maybe the writer will reveal themselves. Maybe they'll, get their 15 minutes of fame. Maybe it was an attention grab. Maybe it was a cry for attention. Sack Lodge and Wedding Crashers telling the girl, don't you get enough attention? Maybe this is somebody that really is crying out for attention. Or maybe there is somebody out there that just didn't believe that he should have gotten 100% of the vote. But I think it's more of a shame that Aaron didn't get 100% of the vote. Think about Ken Griffey Jr. I love Ken Griffey Jr. Great ambassador to the game of baseball. You think of kids, you think of anybody coming up and playing and watching a game. This is your role model as an athlete. gets 99.3% of the vote. And if I'm not mistaken, it was like 2 or 3 votes I think he was short of getting 100% of it. Was Ken Griffey Jr. the greatest baseball player to ever play? Was Derek Jeter the greatest baseball player to ever play? Was Mariano Rivera the greatest baseball player to ever play? And Rivera, listen, all credit in the world to him getting 100% of the vote. Was he the best relief pitcher to ever play? Sure. In the game that he played, yes. In the age of one-inning relievers, ninth-inning stoppers, he was the absolute best, and nobody will ever be able to top that. Was he the best relief pitcher of all time? Was he more dominant than Goose Gossage? Was he more dominant than Raleigh Fingers or Bruce Sutter? Even Dan Quisenberry, for that matter? Lee Smith had his career kind of split up, where more of his career he pitched in a one-inning role, so I would consider him a contemporary to Rivera, and Rivera was better. But, hey, Mariano Rivera is a 2-inning reliever or a 3-inning reliever. May have had a shorter career, may not have been as effective. Did Mariano Rivera deserve 100% of the vote? And the best answer you could give if you're most pro Rivera is yes, but other guys should have gotten 100% too. And you say it's an old school versus a new school thing. Well, you know, for so many years, for 83 years or 82 years, the first 82 years, there's never been a player to get 100% of the vote. And there's been some of the best players to ever play. Like I said, the Cobbs, the Roots, the Ted Williams. And obviously on the pitching side, you think of Seaver, you think of Koufax, you think of Cy Young and Walter Johnson and Christy Mathewson and Pete Alexander. Great, great players. Never got 100% of the vote. And you say, hey, the game or the voting process has changed. If Derek Jeter got 100% of the vote, I don't think it would have meant any more than it does that he didn't. And the best point I can make when it comes to the Baseball Hall of Fame is you're going to be remembered whether you're in or you're not. Derek Jeter, there was no question he was going to get in. The more time that goes by, once fans stop feeling like they're burned because he didn't get 100% of the vote, the more he's just going to be realized as another Hall of Famer, another all-time great. 3,400 hits, 5 World Series championships, a great role model. Many, many baseball fans and baseball players' hero. And oh yeah, he is the owner of the Miami Marlins right now. But it's a perfect segue into talking about those that aren't in baseball's Hall of Fame. Larry Walker ends up getting in. Congratulations. Love the fact that he's wearing a NASCAR SpongeBob shirt when he's getting the call. It's good to see that the writer stepped up, help him out, make sure he gets in that last year because he wouldn't have been eligible for the Hall of Fame next year. And you look back at Larry Walker's career, great numbers at Coors Field, but he was a very good all-around player. And I thought a great contemporary was Dave Parker. And I put his numbers right up against Dave Parker, and Larry Walker's got him beat in just about every category. You think of Larry Walker the same way you think of Dave Parker, that cannon for an arm in right field. Left-handed power hitter, hits for average, drives the ball over the ballpark, hits his home runs. One of the central parts of any team that he played for is batting order. And there was no doubt that Larry Walker was a better player than Dave Parker. And you wonder how far does Dave Parker rank when it comes to being on the outside looking in when it comes to baseball's Hall of Fame. Nice documentary about Dave Parker's career. Pirates make that decision to sign him to the long-term extension. Many fans resented that. And of course, Parker got hurt during that time. For whatever reason, never endeared himself to the fans of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Had some good years. I think he's right on that borderline. If Dave Parker at some point in his lifetime, or hopefully while he's still around, gets into baseball's Hall of Fame, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I don't like the Harold Baines comparison. I really don't. Because I think Harold Baines is a reaction to what has become the watered down process of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Baseball Hall of Fame has done everything it could with its writers, with its veterans committee, to hold out as many great players as they possibly can. And many writers or many personalities like to react to it and say that they're protecting the best interest of baseball. And baseball has done a terrible job of protecting its own best interest forever, since its inception. All you got to do if you want, and I'm not trying to promote previous shows, but I just don't want to repeat the same things. As my starting lineup figures start to fall down, it looks like Doc fell twice, Mark Bavaro, Warren Moon, Steve McNair, all on the ground there. But we talk about baseball not being the greatest of games, with the greatest of people, with the greatest of representatives of the best of integrity forever. And we try to police it as if it should be. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, sitting there right over 60% of the vote. And you're starting to realize that that may be where they end up in year 9, in year 10. Their last couple of years on the ballot. You think of that possibility that maybe there are some writers that are going to hold off for that last year and say, you know what, Bonds and Clemens, yes, may not be Hall of Fame people, may have disgraced the game by using performance-enhancing drugs, but they were still the best of all time. And I believe enough, and I'll believe through that 10th year that they both have their eligibility, that the baseball writers are not that stupid to leave those guys out. You look at the pattern over the last couple of years, and it's not a lot of momentum. This would have been a great year where you've seen classes of players, of 3, 4 players, the last handful of seasons, and Larry Walker certainly got a jump off of where he was last year, and Larry Walker also got a jump because a lot of people were acknowledging this was his last year on the ballot. A lot of the sabermetricians were saying, hey, this guy belongs in. Why are you not voting for him? Going door to door, handing out flyers, saying, vote for Larry Walker. I get it. And this was a great year for him to get selected. But it would have been a good opportunity to see Bonds and Clemens move up a little bit more. And it is a little bit alarming that they haven't. And I would expect to see something similar in year number 9. But in 2022, or the end of 2021, going into January of 2022, I think there are going to be a larger contingent of writers that are who have not voted for Bonds and Clemens, that are going to consider voting for them in their last year. And if they don't, I will think it's the biggest disgrace to baseball. And you think about the Baseball Hall of Fame, and the thing that stands out to me the most and probably disgusts me, frustrates me, makes me not so happy when I think of the Baseball Hall of Fame, because I compare it to other sports, and there's nothing else to do but to compare the operations of baseball and the recognizing of achievement in baseball to that of the other major sports of football and basketball, and to a lesser extent hockey. Basketball doesn't do this. Football doesn't do this. You don't have players that did more or accomplished more from a statistical standpoint than anybody else that are held out for other reasons. But baseball has got the player that has the most hits, the player that has the most home runs, the most MVPs, the most Cy Youngs, the 3rd and 4th highest batting averages, collectively over the history of Major League Baseball for their careers. The 5 players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the highest single season home run totals in baseball history. Not in its Hall of Fame. And I don't understand why. I don't. You know, we could talk about gambling, but baseball was not on a level for 50 years. From the 1860s to 1920, and likely in some cases afterwards, the mob, the gamblers, had a lot of control over Major League Baseball, especially when players weren't getting paid a lot of money. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were other stories that came out about players that received money from gamblers to not play a game on a level. Because the gamblers and the mob always had more money or more earning potential for players than baseball was ever willing to pay them. So we talk about holding out people because they bet on baseball, or holding out players because they threw a World Series. Joe Jackson may or may not have received money. And even if he did, looks like he played the World Series on a level. 3rd highest batting average in baseball history. So I've compiled a list of 20 people associated with baseball, because they're not all players, of Hall of Fame candidates that I would feel a lot better about the Baseball Hall of Fame if these were members of the Hall of Fame. And I start with Gil Hodges. And the negative case against Gil Hodges for many years has been his numbers overall don't stack up amongst the best of all time. And you want to put him up against Jimmy Fox. You want to put him up against Lou Gehrig. And, you know, unfortunately, he just falls a little short. And that's a fact. That's the truth. But why does Gil Hodges have to be compared to Lou Gehrig and Jimmy Fox? During the decade that he played in the 1950s, he hit more home runs than anybody in the National League. He was the premier first baseman of that entire decade and was one of the best players in baseball throughout the majority of his playing career. You can make a case that even though Duke Snider hit a couple more home runs, that he was a better ball player and a more integral player and had a role that was more powerful than anybody else on the Brooklyn Dodgers teams of those times. Vern Stevens, one of the best shortstops to ever play in a game, put up numbers that you compare to A-Rod over the prime of his career. It's not sniffing a Hall of Fame. Curt Flood sacrificed his entire baseball career to fight the reserve clause. And if it wasn't for what Curt Flood did, Marvin Miller may have never gotten associated with Major League Baseball. Marvin Miller may have never stepped foot into baseball and started representing the players. And there may never have been a Players Association. And there may still be a reserve clause in Major League Baseball right now if it wasn't for Curt Flood. A very good career up to that point. Not Hall of Fame worthy based off of his numbers. But rather than finish off what could and should have been a Hall of Fame career, he fought Major League Baseball over the reserve clause. He belongs in baseball's Hall of Fame. Scott Boras, for what he has done representing players, for what players owe to him with the earning power, his prominence and dominance as a sports agent should be acknowledged by baseball's Hall of Fame. Big step was taken this year with Marvin Miller. I think down the road could be with Curt Flood. And I think once you see that happen, the door should be open for Scott Boras to get into baseball's Hall of Fame. Dan Quisenberry, who I mentioned earlier in the program. One of the best relievers in baseball history that nobody talks about. Different era than Mo. He's up there in the mold of a Gossage and a Suter and a Raleigh Fingers. Early times or early career, Lee Smith. Dominant pitcher. We also lost him way too soon. Maury Wills. Baseball went from the dead ball era right into the 1960s without anybody taking liberties when it comes to stealing bases. And Maury Wills redefined the stolen base. Had a very good career. He belongs in baseball's Hall of Fame. Number 14, Al Oliver. First of all, his career was ended because of collusion. Baseball owners got together, said, we're going to control who goes where. And because they couldn't find out of the owners that were collaborating together a home for Al Oliver, he didn't have a chance to play baseball in 1986. When he put up good numbers in the ALCS for the Toronto Blue Jays in 1985. Jim Cott does what's right for the team. When the Yankees decide that they want to use him out of the bullpen. Finishes 17 wins short of 300, the magic number to get into baseball's Hall of Fame. Jim Cott could have said, no thank you. He could have walked away. He could have signed a couple one-year deals and gotten himself to 300 wins on the dot. And he could have been in baseball's Hall of Fame. But he spent about 4 or 5 years as a relief pitcher. First for the Yankees and then for the St. Louis Cardinals. Won a World Series championship with St. Louis in 1982. Jim Cott belongs in baseball's Hall of Fame. How about Mark McGwire? Mark McGwire, along with Sammy Sosa, and don't worry, Sammy's coming, saved baseball after the players' strike of 1994. Fans were throwing dollar bills on the field, the ones that were showing up. Many were protesting by not seeing baseball games. And then a home run chase came in 1998, one in which Hall of Famer Bud Selig, the commissioner, was standing there clapping and applauding. Nobody had any problems with McGwire and Sosa setting home run records. Brought the fans back. Stadiums were filling out. All of a sudden, people were forgetting about the selfishness that led to the strike of 1994 and the first postseason loss in 90 years. The first non-postseason in 90 years. Fred McGriff hit as many home runs as Lou Gehrig. May not have been as flashy. You may not look at Fred McGriff as one of the best players of his time, but he was very consistent. He went out there, he hit his 30, 35 home runs, did it for a handful of teams, was a very good leader, was a good defensive first baseman, and why Fred McGriff is not in baseball's Hall of Fame is something that I'm having a hard time understanding. So now we talk about the top 10. And I believe out of this top 10, two of them we'll see in baseball's Hall of Fame relatively soon. The other ones will need a while, and a couple of them may need a miracle. But I promise you this, we get these 10 players all into baseball's Hall of Fame, and I'll feel a lot more comfortable about the way the Baseball Hall of Fame works. We'll start with Billy Wagner. When it comes to strikeouts per 9 innings pitched, we talk about now where stuff like this is tracked a little bit more. And you talk about more dominant relievers, percentage of batters faced that you just go out there and strike out. When you're talking about the 1 inning reliever today, there's a lot of emphasis on that. And Billy Wagner really is the poster child to that. His strikeout per 9 innings pitched is amongst the best in baseball history. Depending on the amount of innings, it's the best in history. He dominated the closer position, but did it in a way that was very flashy, blowing away hitters. He's creeping up a little bit when it comes to the Baseball Hall of Fame vote. And I think at a certain point, he's going to get the amount of votes that he deserves to be in Baseball's Hall of Fame. Manny Ramirez. Now, there wasn't a more dominant right-handed bat in Major League Baseball. With just ferocity, just dominance, power coming off the bat. Feared right-hand hitters that could just hit the ball out anywhere. There were better all-around players. Their names were Aaron and Mays. But you think, really, when you think of Manny Ramirez, you think of Jimmy Fox. You think of just powerful, loud, right-handed bats. And I know he used steroids. Maybe he used them his entire career. He accomplished things that we haven't seen in baseball history. He belongs in Baseball's Hall of Fame. Sammy Sosa, same reason that we talk about Mark McGwire. And I know the steroid stigma is going to sit over this guy. This is one guy that has been basically told by Major League Baseball, you're not welcome anymore. The Chicago Cubs don't want anything to do with him. Once again, when do you hear this guy speak? When do you hear this guy part of anything in regards to Major League Baseball? If Barry Bonds could wear a uniform, if Mark McGwire could wear a uniform again, Sammy Sosa should be able to. And I don't care how it happened. There is no player in baseball history that has more 60 home run seasons than Sammy Sosa. Hall of Famer. Next one's Albert Bell. 10-year stretch. Probably one of the best. You compare it to a 10-year stretch of, let's say, a Joe DiMaggio. And Joe DiMaggio played a little longer. Joe DiMaggio was considered, along with Ted Williams, the best player in the sport. Certainly the best right-handed bat in the sport. Albert Bell had some other contemporaries. But Albert Bell would probably be in Baseball's Hall of Fame if people felt the same way about him than they did Hank Greenberg. If they felt the same way about him that they did Ralph Kiner, Albert Bell would be in Baseball's Hall of Fame. Curt Schilling got 70% this year. And the best thing I could say about the Baseball Hall of Fame vote this year is I felt a lot more confident that Curt Schilling's going to get in. And he's number 6 on my list. I hope he gets in next year. He had a great career, one of the best postseason pitchers of all time, and we know that he would be in if he didn't give such a negative impression to people that vote for the sport. John Heyman said it himself. He said he hates the writers. As if John Heyman, is this guy that stands up on his soapbox where everybody should kiss his ass. Rafael Palmeiro, one of 6 players in baseball history to have 500 home runs and 3,000 hits. Names are Aaron, Mays, Eddie Murray, Alex Rodriguez, Albert Pujols, Rafael Palmeiro. He belongs in Baseball Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the best hitters ever. Black Sox scandal. Listen, I know it's a big deal, but we're now talking 100 years since that happened. We're talking about 60 years, approaching 70 since Joe Jackson died. We still talk about how great of a hitter he was. He needs to be put in Baseball's Hall of Fame. And then the top 3 are going to be pretty easy. Roger Clemens was borderline on a Hall of Fame path through his time with Boston. Maybe then he decided to use steroids. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was using them his whole career. Maybe he only used them at selective times. Whatever. He still won a whole bunch of games. He still was one of the best pitchers that we've ever seen in baseball history. He won Cy Youngs for 4 different teams. You look at the other baseball pitchers that he is compared to, and do any of them have any doubt as far as why they're in Baseball's Hall of Fame? The answer is no. Peter Edward Rose. More hits than anybody in baseball history. More plate appearances than anybody in baseball history. More at-bats than anyone in Major League Baseball history. More singles than anyone in Major League Baseball history. And most importantly to Pete, was a part of more winning games than any player in Major League Baseball history. All, by the way, which happened before he was betting on baseball as a manager. And as bad as that was, 30 years have gone by and he's been banned for life. It's time to not only bring him back, but put him in a hall where he belongs. And there is no Baseball Hall of Fame, one that I cannot take seriously, unless it includes Barry Lamar Bonds. Most home runs in a season, most home runs in baseball history. The guy was an immortal player. By far the best baseball player I've ever seen in my life. And that includes Mike Trout. Mike Trout's pretty good. He's not Barry Bonds. He's got a long way to go to be Barry Bonds. And you hear with some whispers that maybe Mike Trout's taking HGH. I heard yesterday, and it was a good point, the players that are implicated in steroids may get a little more love once somebody from the hall admits that they used. Because you're not going to be able to kick somebody out. There's already enough suspicion that there's players in the Baseball Hall of Fame that used. Jose Canseco outed Ivan Rodriguez in one of his books. Ivan Rodriguez got in. Mike Piazza admitted to using Andro, which you could debate whether or not that actually is an anabolic steroid. And there's other players that were around the use of performance-enhancing drugs enough. So all it may take is one player to admit it, and then maybe the floodgates will be open, and players like Bonds and Clemens and Palmeiro and Sosa and Ramirez and McGuire will all start to get the credit that they deserve. So I wanted to touch on a couple other things. Zion Williamson making his NBA debut tonight. It's going to be fun to watch, and I think ESPN did a good job of making sure that they're going to televise the game. I wouldn't expect a whole lot from this guy. Obviously, the number one overall pick, got a Duke. Looks like he's going to be a force. Looks like he's going to be a very prominent NBA player. But I wouldn't expect New Orleans, the Pelicans, to go that crazy and play him too much. He may start. He may play a couple sequences. He may play 20 minutes, half the game. But I think this is a team that, number one, is probably looking to add another star player to the mix. Is probably looking to add another young star to their core of young players. Probably wouldn't mind finishing in the bottom of the pack in the NBA this year. And most importantly, you got Zion coming off of a major surgery. You want to make sure that once he's playing, he gets to a point where he's not missing any more time again. And at any time that he's missing is part of load management maybe, but not because of any significant injury. Because the Pelicans, as they're trying to rebuild their franchise, which they obviously did when they traded Anthony Davis, they're looking to build something that's going to be sustainable for years. Final thing I wanted to bring up today is Kansas and Kansas State. The melee, the embarrassment to the sport that you saw last night. And I could talk about a guy picking up a chair. I could talk about a bunch of athletes, a bunch of students that looked, at least from a time frame, a brief time, like they were their favorite thug, acting in a way that is selfish and embarrassing to the college that they represent, the coach they represent, the sport that they're playing. And then I realize how much violence sells over the course of sports. How much major television networks can't wait to show the fight from last night. Can't wait to spend 15 minutes in a round table debate going back and forth talking about it. So if I was any of the players that were involved there, I would hold my hand up and make it a cry for attention. Get my 15 minutes of fame. And I think society has a lot to do with events that you see last night. Now, it could have been a little pushing and shoving, and that could have gotten a couple minutes. Certainly wouldn't have gotten the attention that it got yesterday. Coach Bill Self of Kansas called it an embarrassment. Weber, the coach of Kansas State, kind of apologizing for it, kind of taking blame for it, telling his players to play hard. And maybe it was a little too hard. You're running out the clock and you go and you steal a ball and you go to dunk it and get blocked on, and that's really what led to everything. But we tend to stay away from the responsibility of us as fans and us as people that talk about and represent sports. When we draw a lot of attention to stuff like this, we may be very well inciting the next one. The malice in a palace, the amount of attention that led to for years upon years. Ron Artest's documentary, reconciling with the fan before he reconciled with his Pacers teammates. All the different legs to that. May incite that next kid that's saying, hey, I may not be the best basketball player in the world, but I know how to make a name for myself. And I'm not saying that any of this was scripted. I'm not saying that any of this was premeditated. I just think it's embarrassing that stuff like this draws so much attention. And while I may be willing to turn the other way, there's thousands and thousands and maybe even millions of other people that are going to not wait to see this fight over and over and over again. And the one thing that is the most embarrassing about this incident is the fact that these players piled on to a group of handicapped kids that were sitting courtside, probably watching their first taste of basketball in their lifetime. And he changed the way they view a game. You changed the way their experience was. Every one of those players that involved themselves and threw punches in that fight should be ashamed of themselves. The guy that picked up a chair, you know what? Maybe an example should be made out of him. We live in a world where there are examples made out of people, right? The examples were made in the Houston Astros cheating scandal of Jeff Luhnow, A.J. Hinch, Alex Cora, and Carlos Beltran. Bud Selig, trying to get tougher on steroids, made an example out of Alex Rodriguez. And to a lesser extent, Ryan Braun. Maybe the NCAA will take this kid, and I refuse to even call his name out, because he has done nothing to warrant his name being mentioned. I don't care what his name is. Even if I knew it before, I could care less. The guy that picked up a chair will probably have the book thrown at him. He may not play another game in college basketball. And I'm sure that's not going to help his prospects of playing in the National Basketball Association. A little bit of a recap of the show today. We talked about Derek Jeter getting into baseball's Hall of Fame, which wasn't going to be a doubt. But the fact that he fell one vote short. Spoke about some of the other players that came the closest to getting 100%. Broke down the ballot, gave you a list of 20 players and 20 people associated with baseball that should be in its Hall of Fame. So we'll be back with you. Probably take a little time off. We'll see. I mean, I'm looking really the next week or so. Not a whole lot going on in the world of sports. You got, of course, the Pro Bowl this weekend. No major football until the Super Bowl. I'm going to be out there selling some Super Bowl boxes, so anybody that's interested, you can send me an email, jrple@gmail.com. Or, you know what, that's my PayPal as well. So if you want to send some money, ask for some boxes, I'll put you in. But yeah, we'll keep an eye out. Anything major going on in the world of baseball, sports, and Unifying America. Maybe I'll see you between now and Thursday. But we're going to, go over some old shows. Check out the YouTube videos. Like I said, we've done 4 shows in the last 7 days. Or the last 6 days, I'm sorry. So we'll be back with you next Thursday. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, by 2 Ways, 1 Passion food truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, by St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.